Ladies, gentlemen, and professional wrestling fans all across the globe, welcome to another edition of the J Area Wrestling Podcast. My name is Jose Ramos Jr., and I want to do something a little bit different on this week's episode. Obviously, you saw the title of the video, the thumbnail of the video, and the t-shirt that I don here in front of you. A couple weeks ago, we did a special on the long and illustrious career of The Undertaker. And being that this week, November 13th, will mark 19 years since one of the greatest of all time, Eddie Guerrero, sadly left this earth, I thought what better way to pay tribute, to pay homage, than to dedicate this episode to one of the all-time greats. Eddie Guerrero, for me personally, has meant so much to my fandom of professional wrestling, as well as to the culture of Hispanics all across the world. Eddie Guerrero's impact on the business is still felt to this day, where many members of the roster, not only in WWE, but AEW, TNA, any promotion, and Eddie Guerrero has some sort of influence, some sort of impact that he has left. His style not only transcended the country, but it transcended generations. He helped forge a path for smaller wrestlers to follow. Eddie Guerrero, alongside the likes of a Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, Chris Jericho, Rey Mysterio, they help forge this path that we are currently on in the current state of professional wrestling. And Eddie Guerrero was what I would like to consider a Swiss Army knife. He had so much talent, not only within the ropes, but on the microphone, in backstage segments. His character work, second to none. You look at his work with China, Chavo Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, just to name a few. And it's some of the best television moments that the WWE has ever produced. He had a tremendous evolution from a member of the Radicals in his early years of the WWF to becoming Latino Heat alongside China, to becoming one of the lovable cheaters in Los Guerreros. He also had a tremendous WWE title reign in 2004 and capped it all off with a memorable feud with Rey Mysterio that spanned across the entire year of 2005. Eddie Guerrero left his impact not only on this earth, but certainly within the sport itself. I think back to growing up as a young kid, and two of my favorite wrestlers growing up were Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio. It's well documented on this channel that I've talked about that I've been a fan since 2000. I was 2 years old. That's when my fandom for professional wrestling began. But one of my first and earliest memories watching the product was a matchup between Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio. Those two always managed to captivate the audience. And for a small, young Hispanic kid like myself, it was very inspirational. It helped mold who I was and who I became into as a young adult. Seeing Eddie Guerrero, and like I said, the personality, the charisma, the way he was able to express his emotions with just a smile, with just a glimmer in his eye. He was the total package. Recently, I did one of the 5 counts where I talked about my 5 favorite professional wrestlers of all time, and he ranked at number 3. I think highly of Eddie Guerrero. And yes, he did have his demons. Again, it's well documented, his struggles with addiction. And he overcame those struggles. And that's what led him to win the WWE Championship in 2004, demonstrating, solidifying that it was no longer the land of the giants, but that anybody who possessed the drive, the determination, and quite frankly, the heart, they too can become the WWE champion. I look back at some of my favorite memories of Eddie Guerrero, and of course you have to go back to the vignettes where he and Chavo Guerrero first introduced the world to the mantra of lying, cheating, and stealing. You look at his time as one of the key figures in those early years of WWE SmackDown as a member of the SmackDown 6, where he would put on tremendous matches against the likes of Edge, Rey Mysterio, and Kurt Angle, just to name a few. He reigned as the United States Champion, multiple-time Tag Team Champion, Intercontinental Champion, European Champion, and of course, how can I not mention the WWE title reign one more time? He captivated audiences, but not only through his in-ring work, but again, through his heart. He was able to become bigger than himself. They say some of the best character work in professional wrestling is when a wrestler is able to portray themselves and just turn the dial up to an 11. Whether he was a babyface or a heel, and he could be the very best at either role. Eddie Guerrero was always someone that you knew you were going to be left entertained when you watched one of his matches, when you heard him spoke on the microphone. Again, whether it was a heel or babyface, he was always at the top of his game. It came second nature to him. He was born into one of the most prestigious, illustrious wrestling families, the Guerreros, where obviously he had his brothers, Hector, Mando. He had his father, Gory Guerrero, who was a legend in his own right in Mexico. They helped ran the territories in El Paso. And a lot of people didn't consider it. Would Eddie Guerrero be able to live up to all his brothers' expectations, to his father's expectations? And Eddie Guerrero, I think it's fair to say, has carved out his own legacy in that he has become, quite frankly, bigger than his own name. When you hear the name Guerrero, you think of Eddie. That's the first guy you think of. For me, I think about Latino Heat. I think about the run with China and how he was trying so hard to seduce her and to gain favor with her and try to make her smile and break character. And this was at a time when Eddie Guerrero arguably could have been lost in the shuffle, but he was able to carve out a role for himself in such a deep roster. This was the year of 2000, when WWE was at its peak. It was doing the best business up until that point, business that we haven't seen replicated until as of late. And Eddie Guerrero was able to carve out a role for himself and forged a character out of it, merchandise out of it. Some of my favorite moments from him came in between the year 2000 and 2005. 5 years. 5 years that he was with the WWE. He carved out a career that certainly was Hall of Fame worthy. And that's not even talking about what he had accomplished in WCW and ECW. Again, like I said, revolutionizing the business itself and demonstrating that smaller athletes too can steal the show, can too be considered the best wrestlers in the world. He had Match of the Year in 1997 in what I believe is to be one of the greatest matches of all time. And quite frankly, it's one of my favorite matches. The Halloween Havoc Classic between he and Rey Mysterio Jr., where it was the Cruiserweight title versus Rey Mysterio's mask. It is a timeless classic and has proven to be an absolute clinic for any professional wrestler fan or any professional wrestler. You look back at that matchup and they were doing things that are inconceivable. Granted, there are some maneuvers that have become commonplace in today's world of wrestling. But in 1997, Halloween Havoc, it was groundbreaking. It was never seen, never been done. The two of them, Rey and Eddie, they would become synonymous by not only becoming two of the greatest Hispanic wrestlers, let alone the greatest wrestlers of all time, but their chemistry unmatched. I go back, of course, to their feud in 2005, and I've talked about it on the channel before, where they started off as tag team partners, winning the tag team titles from the Basham Brothers at No Way Out 2005, and this would lead to a friendly competition at WrestleMania 21, where Eddie Guerrero suffered a loss in a match that he thought he had won. He would go on to lose more matches against Rey Mysterio at Judgment Day, the Great American Bash, and of course, the infamous custody of Dominic ladder match at SummerSlam. But he finally would get the victory at an episode of SmackDown during a steel cage match. In this feud, during the duration of this feud, he was a babyface that turned into a heel, a manipulative heel, who was trying to break up the Mysterio family by revealing to the world that Rey was not the father of Dominic, that Eddie was, making a boatload of cash off of the famous "I'm Your Papi" t-shirt, something that would be recreated in the modern times with Rhea Ripley's Mommy t-shirt. And it's still something that we still remember. Dominic Mysterio thriving in today's world of wrestling. And he also has so many characteristics from Eddie Guerrero. This past week, we saw a segment where Dominic was in the ring with Liv Morgan, and Tiffany Stratton comes out and she's making her advances towards the world title, but also makes a hint at taking Dominic away from Liv. And Dominic makes this facial expression where he almost considers it, but then he looks at Liv and reassures her, don't worry about it. And I swear, he makes the exact same face that Eddie Guerrero would have made. It's uncanny. Of course, we know that Eddie's not his real father, but you can see the resemblance in his acting, in his moveset. Eddie Guerrero left that imprint. Eddie Guerrero, for better or for worse, I think is one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. I say or better for worse because he did have his moments. He did have his struggles with addiction. He had his struggles between the years 2001 and 2002 when the WWE had to go ahead and release Eddie Guerrero from his contract because he became a detriment to himself and, quite frankly, a liability to the company. But Eddie would see the error of his ways and he would clean up. He would return to the WWE a year later in May of 2002, and from there on out, that is when he had his best run in wrestling. Eddie Guerrero is the personification of never giving up. He is the personification of never giving up on your dream. And that's why in February of 2004, when he had his matchup at No Way Out against the WWE champion Brock Lesnar, it was a moment. Not a lot of people, I think, thought he would have won that matchup. But then there was that promo where Brock Lesnar was trying to bait Eddie into this emotional trap. And Eddie Guerrero dove into his addiction. He talked about his struggles. It's an infamous promo where he really shares the dark side of his life. But Eddie was able to take the darkest of times and flip it and put it into perspective. So when he won that WWE title, not only was it a big deal for Eddie Guerrero, but it was a big deal for the fans who rode this wave of momentum with Eddie, who had become devoted fans of Eddie. He wins the WWE Championship. He has the huge celebration on SmackDown. And it's exactly what it is. It's a celebration. To see the joy, the happiness, and I think, in a sense, the relief. Because we forget that Eddie was a part of this huge, family, the Guerreros. Because we know him now as one of the greatest of all time. But to have all these older brothers and a father who ran his own promotion, who ran a good portion of the industry for a time being, had high profile matches with legends like El Santo. It had to be a lot of pressure on Eddie, let alone having his own family to provide for. It had to. So winning that championship and then going on to having a high profile matchup against Kurt Angle, again, another one of the greatest of all time at WrestleMania. He would lose the title a couple months later in July against JBL. And in typical Eddie fashion, unselfish. Puts over JBL, who had never become a main event star. JBL has gone on the record saying that the character of John Bradshaw Layfield would not have worked without the help of Eddie Guerrero. He advocated for Bradshaw, and he put him over on TV, creating this new character that was easy to hate. And he would go on to have a memorable title reign of his own. Now, although some people might not be a fan of it, I think it got the job done because that JBL character ruled over SmackDown for the better part of a year and helped put over the next biggest star in wrestling, and that was John Cena at WrestleMania 21. Eddie Guerrero's fingerprints are on that character of JBL. And that was in the year 2004. That was a year before he was taken. I remember it very well. It was November 13th, 2005. I remember I had just seen Eddie Guerrero on an episode of SmackDown. He was fighting Mr. Kennedy to qualify for a spot on Team SmackDown for a Survivor Series matchup that would see SmackDown versus Raw. In his final match, he did what he did best. He entertained us. He brought out the whole, steel chair gimmick where he pretends to hit Mr. Kennedy, but just as the referee begins to, turn around, he throws the chair to Mr. Kennedy, who catches it, and it makes it look like Kennedy had hit Eddie with the chair, which would cause further disqualification. It was the last time we saw Eddie on TV. And I remember watching TV, and it was my mom who had called me over. I was in my room, and she called me over to the living room, where on the news, that's where they broke the story that famed professional wrestler Eddie Guerrero was found dead in his hotel room in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And they said it was due to a heart attack. It was due to heart failure. And just like that, the guy that we had been cheering for so many years, the guy that we had been cheering literally on the previous episode of SmackDown was gone. And I thought that it can't be. We just saw him. And I think it was that moment that really put it in perspective for me. Because obviously we know that the world of professional wrestling is predetermined. We know it's, not entirely fact. Of course, we hate using the other F word. But I think that's when I really came to grips that WWE on television isn't really in the same realm of reality that we live in. And that's when it really, quite frankly, for the lack of a better phrase, became real. Eddie Guerrero not only was a professional wrestler, he was a brother, a father, a husband, a friend to many. So it was difficult dealing with that. I was 7 years old and finding out that one of your favorite wrestlers, one of the guys that you looked up to, was gone. You would no longer be seeing him, again, doing what he did best, and that was entertain. I can remember the following episode of Monday Night Raw, where they had the tribute episode, where they had the whole roster on the entranceway, as well as one of his classic lowriders off to the side. They dedicated the whole night to him, having wrestlers like John Cena, Rey Mysterio, Batista have these little sit-down interviews where they shared their memories, their thoughts, their prayers, and just talked about Eddie, how much they loved him, how much they were going to miss him. We had matches on the card as well that would include the first time ever between Shawn Michaels and Rey Mysterio. It's been reported that apparently at WrestleMania 22, the following WrestleMania, it was supposed to be Shawn Michaels versus Eddie Guerrero, which I think would have gone down as one of the best matches that the WWE has ever produced. It was a clash of styles of two wrestlers who are pretty similar and have similar, arcs in their personal lives. And we never got to see that matchup. Dealing with it was interesting, like I said, as a 7-year-old. And I can only speak to my own personal experiences and personal feelings regarding the manner. Of course, after Eddie's passing, Rey Mysterio would have the whole Royal Rumble run where he dedicated the win to Eddie Guerrero. He would win the world title for the first time, again, as a dedication to Eddie Guerrero. And he would do that at WrestleMania 22, the same weekend that Eddie was inducted into the Hall of Fame by Chavo, Benoit, and Mysterio. And like I said, that was in 2006, 18 years ago. And it's flown by so quickly. To think where Eddie would be now, if he were still with us, I think he probably would still be involved with the business. Now, I don't know if he would be active, but I certainly could see him in some type of role as a mentor, as a coach, perhaps. Not sure if he would be in a producer role, but I certainly could see him having some sort of hand in preparing the next crop of superstars that awaited their opportunity in the WWE. Eddie Guerrero, we know that his family became very involved in the WWE. Vicky Guerrero became a mainstay as one of their top heel characters, heel authority figures. His daughter was also in an FCW, a member of their developmental brand. And I can only think about how they deal with it. Again, obviously, I don't know Eddie on a personal level. But speaking as someone who has lost, like someone has lost their father, it's very difficult, especially at that young of an age. So, Eddie Guerrero, not only as a professional wrestler, but as a human being, really has left an impact on my life, as I'm sure as many of yours. Because if you're listening to this podcast, if you follow this channel, then it has a level of impact on you as well. And that's why I wanted to just open up this episode of the J Area podcast and talk about my feelings about Eddie and remembering him. I think he's one of the greatest of all time. I can't say that enough. Like I said, whether it's in ring, on the microphone, he had all of it. He was the total package. And I think it's a beautiful thing that whenever we see someone do the trick where they pretend that they're hit with a chair, but they toss it to their opponent and try to get the disqualification win, that people chant Eddie. I love the fact that when you see someone go for 3 suplexes, they chant Eddie. That we have the LWO around as a tribute to Eddie, who had formed the LWO and WCW. Like I said, his fingerprints are all over the business, and it will continue to be that way with people like Zelina Vega, like Dominic Mysterio, like Mercedes Moné, who have been very vocal in how highly regarded Eddie Guerrero was in their upbringing. And I just wanted to say that. I'd love to hear your guys' opinion and also your favorite memories on Eddie Guerrero, some of your favorite matches, and just overall your thoughts on Eddie and what maybe he meant to you. Not only as a professional wrestling fan, but maybe as a person. And if one of his matches or one of his stories helped you during a time in your life, I'd love to hear that from you guys as well. But that was just my way of opening the episode. I really felt the need to just talk about Eddie, and to think that it's been nearly 20 years is shocking to me. Time really flies by when you were just a little kid, and now, you're grown. It's crazy. It's crazy how time flies. But we'll go ahead and we'll talk about, obviously, one of the main storylines in the WWE, and that's the Bloodline. Sami Zayn Let's talk about it. Sami Zayn now back with the Bloodline. We saw the episode of Friday Night SmackDown where they had, Roman, the Usos, and Sami in the ring for the first time. I mean, excluding Crown Jewel, but for the first time in a long time. And if you haven't seen my initial thoughts, please go ahead and check out the post-show reaction that we had on Friday night. It's about an hour long, but hey, there's a lot of good content there where we talk about SmackDown as well as answering some questions from you guys, from the J area. We got to talk shop and we got to talk about some of our favorite memories in professional wrestling. It was a lot of fun. It was one of my favorite videos that I was able to upload on YouTube since creating the channel. So I highly suggest, if you haven't seen it, go ahead and check that video out. I promise you won't regret it. But like I said, if you want my thoughts on that, go ahead and check out that video. For the time being, let's talk about the Bloodline. Sami Zayn, the Usos, and Roman are all back on the same page. Clearly, there have been some changes made. There have been some bridges that haven't been burnt all the way. Now, that's not to say that the work is done. They still have to work together. Roman is not 100% babyface. He's not 100% healed. As a matter of fact, you could argue he's still heel in that way because he wasn't willing to apologize to Jey Uso. We still haven't gotten a genuine apology from Roman to Jey. And I think until we get that, we are not going to see any type of improvement on the character of Roman Reigns. He is still the same arrogant, power-hungry tribal chief that we have known for the last 4 years. Now, I think we are on, the edge here. We're close to seeing a change in his character. A little bit of empathy from Roman Reigns. But we're not there yet. We're not there yet. We know it hasn't been officially announced, but it's basically unofficially announced that we will have a War Games matchup between the new Bloodline and the OG Bloodline, which is apparently what they are advertising it as. I saw somewhere that they have merchandise already going out there, the OG Bloodline, which you can now purchase on WWE Shop. Cheap plug for them. And I'm very curious to see how they move forward with the story. What they've been doing is bouncing back between Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown. Now, I want to see more crossover because November 25th, Monday Night Raw will be coming to my home state of Arizona. So you better believe that we'll be there to see Monday Night Raw live. And I can't wait to do that, especially because I'll be able to have some serious coverage of my time there, again on Monday Night Raw. But nonetheless, that's for November 25th. We're talking about the current status of WWE. And we're talking about Monday Night Raw. So let's go ahead and jump over to the red brand here. Damian Priest earns the number one contender spot for Gunther's World Championship, and it makes perfect sense. He was the guy that Gunther had defeated for the World Championship. Damian Priest, number one, never got a rematch for the title that he lost. Number two, he never lost it clean. Finn Balor interfered and cost his former teammate in the Judgment Day his World Championship. And something tells me that story's not done either. Damian Priest is still looking for retribution against the Judgment Day. And he's still looking to earn back that World Championship. Now, will it be at the Survivor Series? I think so. I think it's a safe bet. Reports were saying, and again, they're just reports, we can't trust them 100%, they're not concrete, that it was going to be CM Punk versus Gunther at the Survivor Series. We haven't seen CM Punk since Bad Blood. And he's earned that right. I think he's earned that right to take a little bit of a break here. So, I think it just makes natural sense for Damian Priest to fit into that spot at Survivor Series. Now, you could make the argument that what about Saturday night's main event? It's in New York, the home state of Damian Priest. Maybe they have a rematch. Maybe he has a different matchup. Who knows? Not me. I don't write the show. Survivor Series is shaping up to be a big show here. Specifically because We have the War Games matchup. We have a potential world title matchup. Will we see a women's War Games matchup? I feel like there's been hints of what's going on between Nia Jax, obviously Tiffany Stratton, Bayley, Naomi, Mia Yim. Will there be a War Games matchup for the women? Don't know. I would love there to be, but hey, that's why we watch the product, right? The WWE certainly is on a hot streak right now. They have stories that are just rocking and rolling, for again, the lack of a better term. Look no further than what they've been doing with Kevin Owens. Kevin Owens is slowly becoming one of the top heels in the promotion, really. You saw what he did to Randy Orton, reinstating the danger that comes with a maneuver like the pile driver, something that we haven't seen in quite some time. Michael Cole and Corey Graves really put over the fact that the pile driver is one of the most devastating maneuvers in all of professional wrestling. It is, in fact, the move that would temporarily paralyze Stone Cold Steve Austin during the 1997 SummerSlam event. On top of that, it's just one of the more devastating moves because you're landing an individual's head straight on to the matchup, onto the mat, I should say. So I really appreciate how they went with this old school approach to the maneuver. A lot of times we've seen moves like the suplex, like the DDT, those were finishes back in the day. Those were considered to be finishing maneuvers that would win an individual a matchup. And then nowadays, it's become commonplace. I mean, you see a maneuver like the Canadian Destroyer be hit, and then only for the opponent to rise back up and hit his own Canadian Destroyer. Now, that's not me throwing shots, but it's just a fact of how the industry has evolved. So it's refreshing to see them take a more nuanced, simple approach in really elevating Kevin Owens into this ruthless heel. And for what it appears, we're going to be seeing Randy Orton on the shelf for quite some time. I believe they had released on their social media pages that the WWE says that Randy Orton will be out indefinitely. Now, see, if you ask me, he's out for at least a month. He's missing the Survivor Series. I'm thinking maybe around the time of Saturday night's main event, that's when we see him return. Now, whether or not it's a matchup against Kevin at Saturday night's main event, or maybe interfering in a matchup for Kevin, I'm thinking Kevin versus Cody at Saturday nights. Maybe he interferes. That's my prediction, my early prediction for the show. But it's just the level of significance that the WWE has placed on this storyline since the Bash in Berlin event. And it's been a slow buildup. You know, sometimes when you're cooking a steak, you can't just rush it. You gotta let it cook for a little bit. Give it some time. Otherwise, if you don't, you're gonna screw up the whole serving. And that's what the WWE has done with Cody Rhodes and this Kevin Owens feud. I think after this feud is done, both Kevin and Cody are going to be in better places for it. The main complaint about Cody was that for his title reign, we haven't really been getting a lot of story. We've gotten great matchups against AJ Styles, Logan Paul. Hell, he even had an entertaining matchup against Solo Sikoa in the cage. But we haven't seen real story driven. Obviously, not including the Bloodline. But until we get to Kevin here, this is where it becomes interesting. And I think it leads into the whole Randy Orton feud. Now, whether or not it's the direct feud that we go into after, I think it will be a direct effect on what happens to Randy moving forward. And then after that, I'm thinking Cody wins. He defeats Kevin. Kevin's now a heel. Who does he go after? Look at the year Kevin Owens has had. His three closest friends. It could be argued they betrayed him. Cody teams with Roman, who Kevin had been fighting for the better part of 4 years. Randy sides with Cody. Where's the loyalty there? And now Sami Zayn rejoins the Bloodline, the very same group that he and Kevin vowed to vanquish. And he goes on and he joins Roman again. You know for a fact that Kevin is not going to sit by and allow this to happen. expect him to have some sort of interaction with Sami Zayn, whether it's a verbal disagreement or a full-fledged attack. But think about it. If that's what he did to Randy and to Cody, what is he going to do to Sami, who he has already beaten down in the past? Don't be surprised, again, if he beats down Sami, after the whole War Games match. I'm not saying directly after, but maybe a couple weeks after. Don't be surprised if he beats down Sami and leaves him in a position where he needs to be out indefinitely. It just makes sense. And that's what I love about the current state of the WWE. Everything has logic to it. And that's when professional wrestling, I feel like, is so rich. We watch the matches because we want to be entertained. But when you have underlying storylines like this, it just adds to it. It's like watching a blockbuster film. And I'm not talking about the old school video store. But I'm talking about like a summer hit where it's like, yeah, we want to see this great action. But sometimes you want to know, why are they fighting? Because it just raises the stakes. I love watching King Kong and Godzilla. But at the end of the day, that's just two monsters fighting. Where's the weight? Versus when you look at a movie like Endgame, who had a bunch of fighting and like an almost 45-minute long final battle. But you knew why they were fighting. You knew why it mattered. And why it became the culmination of so much storytelling. And that's what pro wrestling is at the end of the day. That's why it's sports entertainment. But I want to hear from you guys. Obviously, like I said, go ahead and voice your favorite memories on Eddie Guerrero, some of your favorite matchups. What do you think of the current character of Kevin Owens? Do you think he is going to go after Sami Zayn sooner or later? What's your prediction for War Games? Hey, what kind of matchups do you think will happen at Saturday night's main event? I want to hear all your guys' thoughts. Go ahead and sound off in the comments below, like the video, and go ahead and give a good old sharpshooter to the subscribe button to make sure you follow all the professional wrestling content that is produced on this channel. And don't forget to check out the post-show reaction to Monday Night Raw later tonight. Of course, my name is Jose Ramos Jr. Thank you for stopping by on this edition of the J Area Podcast, and I'll see you later.